And so Todd's also here, as he mentioned, he'll be leaving at about 8. So if you have any questions on that you believe that he could answer, you know, let's make sure we try and get that done before 8.
I'm sorry.
No, if you're giving back to you guys because you've done so much organizational work.
Did you have any initial problems with city government trying to audit some of the programming? And if you did, how did you handle it?
No, I think that one of the benefits of having the city spool up the convening board, there was an initial needs assessment survey done at or around the time of the franchise renegotiation back in 99 and 2000. And at that point, the city had a very clear direction that they wanted a nonprofit to operate all three of the entities, public, education, and government. And so from that perspective, it was fairly clear from early on that that was the goal. The city was not, they had explored the models, looked around, because there's a number of different ways that this can be done, and had decided that they liked the thought of a nonprofit operate for all three. That is a little different than what you're doing here. With
What is
just
the other ways besides nonprofit?
Well, I mean, you can have government-run G. You can, you know, Santa Barbara. The nonprofit operates the public and the education. The government operates the, you know. So you can mix that a number of different ways. But the purpose of establishing a nonprofit creates an arm's length relationship between the city and the operation of the channel, and to a greater extent than I think most city entities would realize, provides some protection against prior restraint and First Amendment issues.
Thank you.
So some money comes to you from the PEG funds? And
All of the PEG funds, because we are all three legs of the
Right.
PE and G, so
Right.
we get the entire PEG.
And that covers infrastructure, as I understand it. I'm just learning about this myself, and cameras and equipment and that sort of thing. How is your salary paid, and how are the other costs that aren't covered by PEG support? How does that make?
Well, we'll start with the more generic answer, and then Ventura is a little different for a couple of reasons. The generic answer is that under contract, we also receive 40% of the 5% of the franchise fees.
Wow.
So we receive 2% of the 5
And
and those then are operating.
And that contract is between the cable providers and the city?
No, that's between the city and the Access Corporation. So CAPS is the the designated access corporation for the city of Ventura. So the franchises, there were individual franchises with each MSO between the cable ops and the city. And then the city engaged in a contract with CAPS to be the access operator. And so under that contract, 40% of the franchise fees, in addition to the PEG fees, and for us it amounts to somewhere between 500 and 550 and operating around 80. Because there's a settlement agreement between the city and Time Warner that releases the restriction on Time Warner's PEG funds from that capital restriction. And so we are actually able, the PEG funds from Time Warner are unrestricted in our case. And so we have a much larger operating pool than in a normal situation.
And how much money is that total from this, the 40%?
Total, the 40% is probably around, I don't break it out that way, so I think it's probably in the 350 to 400,000 range.
Okay.
It's the bulk of, well, you think of it, we receive 2% in franchise fees, we receive 1.6 in PEG fees.
Great, thank you.
Who made the decision to give you the 40% of the 5% franchise fees? Was that made by a staff member, or was that made by the city council?
I was not in place at that time, but as I understand it, it was part of the overall negotiation when they were looking to spool up the Access Corporation to operate it. It was, they brought in, I believe it was the Buskey Group. It's a group out of Sacramento that does consulting for this segment. And, you know, one of the conversations was you need operational dollars to make this work, and they came to 40% as a number that they started with, and it seems to have worked pretty well. So.
That would be next to impossible to do here in Oxnard, because the 5% is already going into the general fund. And
Well, it does here, it does in Ventura as well. It's just the city has made a decision that the operation of access is significantly important enough to fund. And a partial argument to throw at that is that, you know, you're creating local content, which creates a differentiation between cable and other video service providers, and to a certain extent protects those franchise fees. At some point, if you don't have a differentiation, if there's no differentiation between cable and satellite, then people are gonna go where it's cheapest. And if they go to satellite, the city loses those franchise fees as well. And so to a certain extent, the generation, now you have a third of that argument because you only have the public. But the argument is that education and government and public contribute localism to cable that doesn't exist on the other video service providers.
And I hope everybody understands what the gentleman just told us, that, you know, that's highly important. The Ventura city government, they have no input on content.
No. Well, I mean, let's back up a step. The Access Corporation, we manage the resources. In the case of Channel 15, the Education and Government channel, the city is the partner who programs the content on that channel. So with regard to the government programming, they have 100% input. With regard to public access, they have no input.
Right, and that's, yeah, and that would be my main concern, is to have a totally hands-off relationship between the public channel. You know, the other two channels are, it's fair game, you know. Thank you.
So did you form a nonprofit corporation after or before the city started? You would have to form the corporation before you go to the city for the contract?
I think that it's probably a parallel path, you know, a kind of a trip that you take. You can begin the filing for a 501c3, and you may be able to get a preliminary determination from the IRS. It won't be a final determination for, I think ours took 4 or 5 years even to come through. That initial filing can occur. I think it's a step of good faith and a certain threshold that you rise to meet. People think you're serious about it if you do that. At the same time, you know, there's costs involved that you're going to want to look at, you know, what the sunk costs of that are, and if you don't get the contract, is it worth proceeding too far down that road without some kind of a contract at the end of the road?
What you're saying is kind of like the chicken and the egg?
Yeah, you're going down the road to kind of feel your way through it.
Let me, one point to it. You can do your California nonprofit corporation, you get that in 10 days. It's not going to give you charity status, but it would be enough to start the process, and it would be the minimal cost. And then work as part of the agreement that you'll take the next step, federal costs, filing fees and so forth if you're awarded the RFP. Holmberg had agreed to do that way back. And because of the politics at that time, I chose not to proceed on that path. But the city has, with Steve Fisher present, accepted that mentality. So that would be my suggestion to do it. And you're right, to contain those costs, you wouldn't take the next step until you were awarded the RFP.
How many employees do you?
Well, again, realize it's a package, public education and government. So we currently have 6.5 full-time equivalent, 5 full-time, and 3 part-time.
And that's kind of how this 350, 400K gets distributed, is your salaries?
Salaries are probably 70 to 75%. I mean, there's fixed costs. We have a facility, so there are, you know, insurance and power and, you know, all of the things that go with operating. We're sitting on an acre with, you know, 6,800 square feet, 7,000 square feet. So there's fixed costs to operating that facility.
And those aren't covered by, like, those aren't covered by pay?
Well, pay, in our case, again, because we're a little bit different in that we have that removal of the restriction from the time we're paid, we have a much larger pool of unrestricted funds. Generally speaking, since we built our building in 2005, 2006, and we've continued building it, and we've now in the process of building a remote truck, we have exceeded the capital funds, exceeded restricted funds because of equipment, facilities, or vehicle purchases over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. So it hasn't been an issue for us, and generally speaking, we're expending ahead, we're expending out of operating, and then by accounting, backfilling as the payments come in. So at the end of the year, the target generally each year is around 80 to 90,000 in restricted spending to balance the 80 to 90,000 of restricted income.
Does the county give you any money?
No.
Is that money available? Is there money from the county available?
Probably, it's something we've considered asking about, but generally speaking, I'm not sure that's something, because of the way we're spun up, the nonprofit is designated as a City of Ventura entity. The funding comes from the City of Ventura. What you would have to do is create a more broadly based, either a nonprofit or a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, memorandum of understanding, and, you know, quite honestly, it's probably easier to do it under contract than to go through and create a nonprofit that would expand capacity.
To get county funds?
Right, so for instance, if the county decided they wanted someone to operate and to provide services, then we would probably look at it as a contractual service that ran concurrent with our city contract. So that as we move down the road, when we renewed our city contract, we'd go back to the county and renew it. We probably wouldn't try to create a nonprofit with the same franchise relationship on a larger physical region basis. It would be very difficult to balance the needs of the county with the needs of Ventura, and to keep from commingling that, it would be very difficult. Instead, you would set up a separate contract to define very specific services and the cost of those services and deal with it that way.
Does the county uses the same contractor that the City of Oxnard did? Do you grant this?
Do you have other funds?
We have membership fees, which is small, 6,000 to 8,000 a year. We're on a pace, I think last year it was between 40 and, maybe, I don't know, 40,000. This year probably closer to 50,000 in fee-for-service and consulting. So I do consulting work, groups like this, for instance, if you wanted to build a facility, I could consult with you and work with Pasadena, just finished a job in Burnsville, Minnesota. And then we also provide production and post-production services to members of the community who don't want a job done but don't want to do it themselves. And so we have a fee-for-service rate card where we'll provide those services.
So the cable franchises in the county, they're also paying the 5% and the 1% to the county, or to the PUC?
I honestly don't know.
And then back to the county, okay.
Yeah.
You have your facility on Day Road,
Yes.
and you have an acre?
We're on about an acre of land on the east edge of the Ventura College campus. We're on the college leased it to the city on a 50-year lease. We're in year 10 or 12 of that, and then we sublet it from the city.
Fantastic, that's great. So jealous.
Yes, it's you know, and it really gets down to, you know, the relationship between the city and the Access Corporation, and building up a trust and building up a common community good, and being able to communicate that that's the purpose.
How many people on CAP's board of directors?
We have a board of 13, we have 4 designated partners. That's from the city, the school district, the library, and Ventura College. We have 4 elected out of the membership, and we have 5 appointed.
How did you approach Ventura College to, get involved?
They were in it from day one. They were part of the, Larry Calderon at the time was the president of the college, and he was one of the main drivers and basically brought the parcel to the table.
Fantastic. What kind of turnover do you have on your board of directors?
Well, terms are 2 years with a 6-year overall term limit. It varies. Current board chair is in his 5th year, stepping down. The vice chair will become chair. He's been on 4 years, I think. The designated directors from the institutional partners can change somewhat more frequently, or some of them were there for quite a long time, and then we had a series of turnover. It just depends on, some of it was related to the downturn of the economy and downsizing, so jobs were eliminated and different people stepped in.
What kind of mix of experience and expertise do you have on the board?
Well, right now we have retired, 2 or 3 retired business accounting types. Norm Bergman's a retired CFO of Community Memorial Health Systems. Ed Weehan's a retired business administrator, very involved with civic committees and commissions. We have Ron Halt has been on since the convening board. He's found a way around the term limits. The term limits are written for each specific seat type, and he keeps getting ping-ponged back and forth. But he brings a legacy. He was involved early on with the George family and not Wave, it's the one before Wave, Avenue Cable, and doing television in classrooms in the 70s as an educator. We have George Alger, who is a producer, but he's also a marketing professional. Daryl Dunn's an associate pastor at South Coast Fellowship. Let's see who else. And then Gwendolyn Huddleston's a dean in the liberal arts program at Ventura College.
What do you do about sponsorships and business partners to contribute some operating?
We've not done a lot with it. We've explored it. We've quite honestly stayed away from it. As an access corporation, you run into a question of what do you promote, what do you sell when it's not your content. And so there is language in the operating policies that allows the producer to do underwriting PBS style opens and closes and that kind of thing.
This program has been brought to you by.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah.
As an access corporation, you're really selling the concept of the channel, the concept of community. And generally speaking, my background's in commercial television. The cost of setting up the back office to manage that is higher than most people would think. It's not trivial to set up as runs an ascertainment log, or as run logs in an ascertainment, go through that whole billing cycle that would satisfy most people. Instead, what we've looked at is donation, more typical nonprofit donation opportunities, support our digital storytelling program, support, whatever the different initiatives that are going on. We are looking to branch out over the next year heavily into sports, and we see an opportunity there where the payoff is quite honestly large enough to justify going into a true sponsorship model. But again, until we're producing that content that can drive that underwriting or that sponsorship, it's difficult to convince people. And you run a certain, I'm going to say it gently, a certain risk that someone buys sponsorship or advertising, and then somebody from the public produces a program that they disagree with. I mean, it's difficult to sell the concept of public access. It's easier to sell specific programming like election coverage or sports or things like that.
Okay, what do you do when you need legal counsel
We have, the board has selected, we had one attorney from the very beginning, and he retired, and we interviewed we brought in 3 or 4 attorneys, and the board interviewed them, and it's actually Tony Strauss, with Strauss Law Group, has been corporate counsel. I think we have a $3,000 or $4,000 legal budget, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of issues at
Can't
this
get
point.
into pro bono work?
No, generally not.
That's great, that's like great information.
So, you've mentioned Access Corporation. Are you a corporation?
Yeah, they're a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit corporation.
Got it. So you are 501c. Okay.
Could you give your name again, please?
Todd, T-O-D-D, Thayer, T-H-A-Y-E-R.
What would be your, if I may, what would be your recommendation as to our next step? Give up?
I have watched this, no, not at all. First of all, I would say no. I've watched this happen, and I think there are 3 or 4 things that make Access successful. The first thing is a broad, inclusive coalition. So the first thing I would say is find your faith-based partners, find your nonprofit partners, find your social service advocacy groups, and bring them to the table, or at least a representative to the table. The second thing is you've got to have a healthy, functional relationship with city government. You have to have it. They are your funding partner, and they control the gateway to the resources that you have to have. I would say the third thing is focus on policy. Policy defines mission, policy supports mission, policy protects mission. Much of the last 3 or 4 cycles that I watched of this have focused on technology, real estate, connectivity, staffing, budgets, backwards. You've got to get policy in place. You've got to create the structure to create a partnership with the city, to create policy that then says, this is what we're here to do, this is how we're funded. Then you take the next step. And I think if I've watched and learned anything over, I was in commercial television up until 2003 when I moved, take over CAPS, is that people, and I'm a technologist, I design and build facilities for a living, that's what I do. I like technology, it's really cool, we do some really cool stuff, but you've got to get the policy part down first. You've got to get the relationship between your community and the city. You've got to define that and make it healthy so that there's a trust. And, it's not that you're not going to do what public access is here to do, but it's that you're going to do it in a healthy, responsible manner that reflects the community as a whole. There was a book out by the gentleman, I think it's the Sojourners Society, he took a sabbatical during the last election. And the book was about the loss of the common good. An access center, an media center should be about the common good. What services are you going to provide? What kind of training are you going to offer? Those kinds of things, far more important than some of the technological and other issues.
How did you recruit your staff?
Over time, I'm not new to the Oxnard. I moved up here in 1985 and helped build and sign on Channel 63. And so I'm not unfamiliar with Ventura County as a media entity. Basically, we hired people, if we keep them for a year before they moved to LA, we were lucky. And so we were, at that point, a training facility. And I think to a certain extent, we have 2 tiers of staff. We have people who live here, who have been in industry and have moved out because they no longer wish to be in the LA industry. And they find out who we are, you know, we go through a normal hiring process. The second tier is we have younger folks who come in as interns, either out of Foothill or El Camino or Buena High School or VC, which is a little softer these days because they don't have a journalism multimedia program anymore. But we find them, we bring them in as the part-timers, and we get them involved in doing the youth programs and in the training programs. And we keep them. We've got a gentleman who came to us through less than auspicious circumstances. He had gotten caught doing burnouts on one of the fields at Ventura, and so they hooked him up with us to do community service. And three years later, he ran our summer program for youth, finished his degree in Santa Cruz this year, and is now moving down to LA to pursue a career. And so it depends on the model and what you're trying to do. As a manager, it's difficult to answer your question with, I know what you're asking and I don't know that I can answer it until you know what you're building. And again, I think that's down the road. There are folks from the entertainment industry that are here. And there are folks that you can find. And then it's a question as a manager of putting together the team and finding a way to keep them. Because if they're younger and they get some experience, they get pulled right down there. Less so now because there's less production and less different things going on, but there's still, you know, quite a bit going on down there.
Is this something that this group is capable of pushing forward?
Sure.
Or do we need to like wait for a David Cruz type person to lead us to the promised land?
No, in fact, I watched the David Cruz thing. And I think that you're far better off with a broad grassroots coalition that can gel around a common community goal of providing a resource to the community. If that's the goal, you know, if it's not the goal to build a television empire, if it's not the goal to, you know, become the gadfly, and not that that's not a bad thing, but that can't be the goal of the Access Corporation. That's the goal of the Access producer. And the ability to separate that out and to, as an organization, say, we'll take left, we'll take right, we'll take center, we'll take up, we'll take down, we'll take everybody that comes in the door. We're going to treat them with fairness and with equity. We're going to teach them how to produce media so that they can put it not only on the channels, but on the web. And walk away with a variety of media skills. This isn't just about a channel. You could have an Access Corporation without a channel these days. You could have low power FM. You could have stream, you know, Sacramento this is the last round of the Community Radio Act, the last round of filing in October. We're applying for a low power FM license. Sacramento's had streaming radio for 12 years, and they're applying for a low power FM license so that they can actually go over the air. You know, one of the things you can consider is start a YouTube channel. Start a streaming radio channel based on local community. Those kinds of things. Your organization builds capital, and you can go to your electeds and you can say, this is what we're doing. This is not our voice, but we've created the platform, we've created the training so that other individuals can come in and use it. I think that's the key, that you create a fair, neutral, equitable infrastructure, platform, so that the entire community can participate and benefit.
Even the ones you disagree with, right?
Just as Branda said, the answer to speech you don't like is not less speech, it's more speech.
Yeah.
That's true.
And that's the answer. People may not agree with that. We have a gentleman in Ventura who will call about every election cycle and complain that our content is too far leaning the other one way. And I will say, well, come in and produce content that leans the other way. Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I just want to call and complain about all the content that's leaning the wrong way on your channel. And that's the reality.
They need to do it.
You know. So the other piece that we've not talked about, we've talked about that arm's length relationship with the city. There are 2 or 3 reasons that you do that. The first is political content, so that they're not in control of a channel on which their electeds are campaigning under their control. The second main one is mature content, let's say. In the state of California, you can have content that is indecent. You can have content that is pornographic, that is not obscene. And you as an access operator must air it. Okay? That arm's length relationship protects the city from prior restraint. And say, they don't have to say, they can just sit there and steer everything to the district attorney and say, if you think it's obscene, file a lawsuit. I am prohibited by policy and by federal law from restricting any speech other than obscenity. Okay? And so you handle that with safe harbor definitions. It doesn't air till midnight or between midnight and 5 a.m. In Ventura, we've placed a V-chip encoder so that people can make appropriate viewing choices for their own household. I've never given this speech before. But that's, the process during your hiring. If we were to offer you a job and you were to accept it during the course of your employment, you may come into contact with media that you find objectionable. You need policies in place on the HR side. It goes back to policy again. How do you handle when an employee comes into contact with mature content? What is their option? Who do they come to? How do you schedule around it? And basically, when we go through interviews and hiring, it's contact your supervisor or myself, and we'll make changes, and if I have to, I'll do the encoding to make sure that you're not subjected to stuff that's objectionable. And we won't get into what California Penal Code 311 says about what is not obscenity. If you can find it in a bookstore, in a video store, at a newsstand, it can air on an access channel. So you need to be aware of that. You can't say no. There are very few things in California that you could say no to. What you say is, I'm going to pull it, I'm going to review it. You may have a content review committee on the board, and then you'll make a determination as to whether or not it is reasonably obscene. And then you get into probably having an attorney that is giving you a set of guidelines. And then you make a decision whether to put it back on the air because it is not obscenity, or keep it off the air and refer it to the district attorney, or basically have the complainer refer it to the district attorney. So those are the 2 main reasons to, during the course of your conversation, push for a separate, look, you really want us spinning up a nonprofit that manages for you. You want this, it's good for the city.
How much content are you asked to air that falls into this category of
Virtually none.
Virtually none.
Virtually none.
So it's a fear thing.
But we have. Oh, no.
You have.
Oh, no. Yeah. Dr. Susan Block. Look her up on Wikipedia, it's scary. She's won 3 lawsuits against the LAPD. She won a lawsuit against, 3 or 4. It's an interesting story. So we had somebody submit, and it's produced in LA. Because of our policies, members are allowed to produce or submit externally produced content. It's about as explicit as you can get.
So, but I heard you say virtually not.
Now, today.
Today. But in the past.
Oh, yeah.
It's, how much? Is this a really a serious thing that we need to spend on?
Not a lot.
We need to be careful.
You need to be aware of
Aware
it.
and careful.
It needs to be contained in your policies, how you're going to handle it. Because you are required as an access operator to air that material.
Got it.
You may not decline to air it. Well, you may decline to air it and open yourself up for, you have broad protection as an access provider under the First Amendment. Okay, you have some of the biggest get out of jail free cards that they make under the First Amendment on the channel. The other thing to consider is, what are your streaming policies? There's a lot, well, for instance, we don't stream our channels, and there's a variety of reasons. I won't undercut the cable company and the revenue. by providing an alternative to people who don't want to pay for cable. So we don't provide streaming channels. There's a lot of access centers that do. But if you're going to stream it, you open yourself up to, because you're not protected, the same protections on the channel do not extend necessarily to the internet. So there are ramifications down the road. Now, most of this is out there. You don't have to write this from scratch. You go to access centers, you pull down their policies, and you meld it together. I'm not saying you spend a lot of time on it, but you do need to be aware of it, and it does need to be included. When this happens, this is what's going to occur.
Will those other entities object if they feel you plagiarized?
Oh, no, but it's a very, very sharing, you know, most of them have it up on the web, and you can just download it and cobble it together.
I read 3 over the past couple of days. And there's a lot of similarity. When you say, could you define access corporation, do you mean public access?
Well,
Or is it a special legal?
no, it's just, we're the access corporation for the city of Ventura. That's how we're defined in the contract with the city. In our case, it's public education and government access. You could have an access corporation that's just P, you could have an access corporation that's P and E, like in Santa Barbara, you can have an access corporation that's all 3 pay.
Now, how many channels do, here in Oxnard, it's Verizon and Time Warner, how many pay channels do they have to give us? Is it based on,
Under
programming hours?
DivCA, it's the first 3, one for public, one for education, one for government, and after that, it's based on, I think it's 64 hours, either 56 or 64 hours a week. You have to ask for the board.
have you reached that threshold?
We're only bringing 2. We have a public and we have an education and government.
So, just a little bit of clarification. As you may have read in the paper, our former city manager is suing the city. So, similar to Sunday morning TV programs, we could actually have a program that's a panel of experts discussing the pros and cons of this lawsuit, even though it hasn't settled in court or anything, just to bring out information, investigators, et cetera. It would be really cool.
So, and yes, absolutely, but keep that separate from the conversation about spinning up the access corporation.
Oh,
The
yeah.
use of the channel and those views and content are a separate issue from creating the infrastructure and the community resource that the access channel is. And I say that not to minimize what you just said, but to carve and to craft the message that you're sending to the city that the Access Corporation is a responsible part of the community. We're an anchor institution, and we're here to serve everyone.
So a member could submit that content.
Then, once you have it, open the doors.
So you're saying a member would sit, not the body itself.
Correct.
Gotcha.
But I'm hearing you say that it's probably impolitic for a member of the organizing committee to put something like this on YouTube, for instance, or to put this out there.
I wouldn't go that far.
You wouldn't?
No. I'm just saying in your official communications,
Yes.
and be aware of the reputation and the representation that you bring with you.
But if it's fair, pros and cons equal.
But you also need to be aware that if they see it and you're on the committee, will that bring baggage to the party? I mean, let's be honest, it will. So you as an individual may need to decide which is more important, your participation in the organization during this application process, or using that voice on YouTube.
But I could get a friend woman.
Well,
You got a quarter of a million people
Get
to
somebody
pull
else
from.
to do it.
You work as
I'm just trying to bring the political reality is, you know, if I'm lighting matches in the middle of a firehouse, it's gonna be hard for them to sell me on, you know, being Smokey Bear,
Yeah.
you know?
What do you think a reasonable timeline is for us to put together the kind of board that you're suggesting that we have?
I don't think even the board is the issue. quite honestly. I think what the issue is the policies, the statement of purpose, the goals and objectives of the organization, and to create that story.
The bylaws.
Not even the bylaws yet. I would get to the point where this is why we're here. And this is about storytelling for the gentleman in the media. You're telling a story. We're not getting into the law of it. We're telling a story about what the benefit to the community is to have this open platform where people can come and learn, where youth who've been disenfranchised can begin telling, speaking about oral histories that are going on in the community. I mean, there's a very broad, there's all kinds, you've got a huge veteran base. Is anybody collecting those oral histories? Is anybody recording those, even now? Is there somebody that can go out and start doing that? And you begin to tell a story about what an access organization brings to the table for the community as a whole. That's what you work on, is what are we going to, why we're a benefit to the community.
And we can get help with that from Buskey and others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they get paid, so those,
Last week.
they cost. And she does, Sue and I are we've been on the national board together, we're old friends, and she'll do a whole lot of work. The other thing is she's got 50 years of experience with it, and so, the problem I think that you have is at some point, is the city taking you seriously? That's step one, is the city taking you seriously?
It's not my perception at this point that it is, but I don't know. I don't
So
know.
how do you, let me ask the question, how do you get the city to take you seriously? Broaden the coalition,
Right.
bring in your faith-based, bring in your nonprofit organizations, bring in your advocacy groups, your social justice groups. Bring all those to the table and look at your veterans groups, your social, your Lions and Kiwanis and Rotary clubs. Where are your schools who may be underserved in the educational side may find traction with the public access portion of it. And you build a coalition that has a voice that is serious enough. And then the next step is you go start working on, how many city council members do you have? Then you only got to count to 3.
Right.
And if any of them are giving you a smoke screen that they're afraid of negative publicity, like they might get together and criticize, the release of this prior city manager, it's a smoke screen, because what they're trying to tell you is they've not heard of YouTube, they've not heard of Facebook, and they've not heard of Twitter. So if you want to criticize the city, in a heartbeat, you have several thousands of people looking at
Comment
that
section of the
criticism.
VC Star.
Yeah, so if they're gonna tell you we don't want this because we're afraid of criticism, it's a smoke screen, it's a lie.
But the answer is not to focus on that.
Right.
Is to shift to, yes, that's a potential, but so is having 12 to 16-year-olds going through a summer program, learning how to, if you go to Water Take One in Ventura, we've got our summer programs that they produced. We went out, we did a field trip at the water plant, and they did a whole video for it. So there are steps that you take to create capital, to create a gravity around the movement, the group that you have. And I think the first step is broaden it. And the second step is, what is the agreed upon community benefit that everyone can get behind?
Here they have
What time is the meeting though? I just want to.
I'm
I'm okay, I'm all right. I give myself
See
a
the clock
pat.
behind
I had
you.
a quick
Oh.
question before you leave. I was part of a group that was with David Cruz, right? And when the city presented, the RFP and MOU and everything, it included policies and procedures and telling the people that were trying to, put in the proposals for the channel that they had the right to preempt all programming and you had to, air the public meetings. So what they gave them was the government channels,
Right.
policies and procedures.
Right, and what you would have to do then is immediately edit and send it back and say, thank you
Right.
so much for this as a starting point.
Right.
as a public access corporation, we see our goal moving in this direction. And so we've redlined this document for you,
Right.
and we'd like to see these changes made.
See, David Cruz didn't do that.
Right.
So when they came back, it was still a government access
Right.
channel.
Well,
Well, then they
that's
had
where,
the previous city councilman resubmitted, and it looked a whole lot like the procedures manual from TO.
And, you know, you can cherry pick from a lot of places. Just make sure that when you cherry pick from looks like what you want it to be at the end of the day.
and that's where we need to study the city's ordinance.
You know, I don't think you
So when
do.
they try to come back,
Yeah, I don't think that's as big a deal, because once you've created, see, part of this is, you're not really looking to go head to head with them on ordinances.
Yeah.
You don't wanna try to win that fight, I don't think.
well, they have a problem with staff.
Right.
Well, state law trumps local law too.
Well,
so I
that
mean,
too,
we're-
but I think
we're gonna-
more than anything is if you create a story about how this is going to benefit the community, it's going to benefit the city, at-risk youth, whatever the story is, veterans, you find those, you know, I mean, we've got probably 35%, 40% of our public access is churches. You know, we've got a lot more than I do.
Religious stuff too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When you say policy, are you referring to what the city referred to as a manual? And here, this would be the West Hollywood Public Access Operations Policies?
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, okay. So we're not talking about different things then?
So you're talking about ultimately bylaws, because that floats up a level, but originally it's what are you going to provide to the community? You're going to provide training, you know, so my opening line is CAPS is a nonprofit corporation that provides facilities, equipment, and training to the community. That's what we do.
Okay.
We're not here necessarily to provide content.
And you don't mind if we steal that?
We're changing our tagline, we're changing our mission statement, you know. So one of the things and this is more a generic nonprofit. The other thing is, I'm sure you've got nonprofit consultants here in town. Have them come in and go through a brainstorming session. What is your vision statement? And out of your vision statement, what is your mission statement? Your vision statement is, if Oxnard Community Media was successful, this would happen. In a perfect world, we could shut down because this has happened. Every voice is heard, everyone knows how to use community media. You know, you got a vision statement. This, in a perfect world, this would happen. And then you have a mission statement that says, this is how we're gonna get to that. And that's just generic nonprofit that, you know, find a consultant and have you walk through. But I would, again, before you start that, broaden the tent stakes, get more people under the dome. And be more inclusive, get it, the more segments of the population, seniors, youth, veterans, service clubs, all of that.
Now, do those people have to have a representative at these meetings, or can they just say, well, we support your goals?
It depends on the relationship you have with them. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, this is going to boil down to your relationship with the community focused into a relationship with those 5 city council members. So do you need them to go to a city council member? You probably want them at the meeting. They need to understand where you're going. Because 10 years ago when I walked in the door, didn't know any of the 7 city council members in Ventura. Okay? I have not had yet a face-to-face meeting with one city council member. But every city council member knows who I am. Because we have, over time, we show up at their events, they call me to come and cover their stuff. Because we've established a relationship as a nonpartisan, neutral provider of quality, local relationship that can get 3 of 5 votes. I mean, you gotta count to 3. And you do that by creating relationships with people in the community until you find the guy. What's that, you see that in the movies, who's the guy? No, that's not the guy, who's the guy? Who's the decision maker? Who's the one? And you're gonna find somebody that's gonna put the pervasive argument in front of some of these council members. But I think the first step is you've got to create a tone that, unlike the previous, however many, because I've had conversations with the PIO, like I say, going back over 5 years now. In fact, I'm invited to a meeting next Wednesday to speak. I guess there's the Arts Culture Commission, something with 2 electeds on it, and we'll have a similar conversation, I'm guessing. But you've got to be able to walk in with a serious point of view and a serious set of goals and objectives and a realistic plan to get there. And it may rely on them to participate, but you've got to be able to at least jump the hurdle and be taken seriously. Because right now, I think the answer is the city doesn't take this seriously.
Now, and I apologize.
And I apologize if I offend anybody by saying that,
But
but the track record.
You're giving us great, so much great information. But now, should we concentrate our efforts onto developing a policy or a manual?
Well, I would start with the policy. I'd say, what do you want to do? Get a whiteboard, get an easel. What do you want to do? What are our goals and objectives for the first year, for 3 years, for 5 years?
Well, because I'm thinking, is this something that should be ready for the cultural arts committee?
Well, I don't,
On the ninth.
no, not,
Just, I mean,
no, not for, I would say not for
not a
next week.
finished product.
No, it's way early for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's been enough churn and turmoil from previous iterations, they're gonna take their time too. I think what I would do is, like you say, go out for the next week and try to find other folks, bring them to the table. Find an attorney who's got social justice or civil rights background and can help you with crafting statements. Because there are phrases and language that are more acceptable and open doors more easily than not. And there's ways, some of this is about the frame as much as it is about the picture. How you're presenting yourselves is every bit as important as what you're actually saying. And so being able to boil that down and put the point of the spear out there, who's your spokesperson? When you show up 200 strong at a city council meeting, don't have 200 people speak. Have one guy go up, very quiet. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mayor. My name is so-and-so, and I represent these 200 people who, after 5 years, are coming to you with a serious plan to put public access back on the air in Oxnard. We hope that as you review our proposal, you will find that we have done our homework. We've resolved a lot of the issues, and we look forward to working with you to make this a success. That goes a lot farther for them. And then you turn around and you sit down, everybody does whatever, and Ventura they do. Some of it's the presentation too. Some of it's the message. Some of it's who's standing behind you. It's like that, that's been done in a lot of movies, where the one guy's out in front and everybody turns and runs away, and then there's 90 million soldiers standing on the ridgeline behind. Who's standing behind you? And that's where the letters of support, if you've got a packet yay thick from 200 social service organizations, nonprofits, churches, veterans groups, social clubs, blah, blah, blah. But that's something that you've got to build, is the relationship with those folks. Then it turns around and flows back up to the elected stakeholders. Exactly. And you're convincing them that they have a stake in what you're doing. It's not easy. But it's
That's what
worth
I
it,
said, it's a lot of outreach right now.
but it's worth it.
Yes, I can see that.
I mean, if you go through the phone book, how many churches are there? How many of them already produce media of some kind? You know,
Very St. Paul's.
Well, I'm thinking right now, we have an interfaith meeting at All Saints Church here in Oxnard on Wednesday the 4th for the interfaith lunch. And I'm thinking this would be a good time to introduce the topic because there's a lot of religious leadership present.
Okay.
And it's at 12 noon. And it's a potluck. Anybody's.
I mean, if you had to guess right now, how many city council members of the 5 would support this? If it was well-researched, well put together, and you walked in,
I think we have-
Or,
you think
I
so?
could say that too, but.
At least three.
Including funding?
Know that off the bat.
Yeah,
I think
No,
that's really
I'm
optimistic.
not sure about the funding.
Yeah, the funding is problematic.
The funding, that's where, if we do really well, what Todd has kind of outlined for us, I think we can turn that funding issue in our favor.
sure.
I really do believe that. But right now, everybody wants a piece of the city, and the city is not broke, but the city has to be, we have a legacy of irresponsibility and other kinds of stuff. We have to be careful, they have to be careful, we have to convince them.
Right, but this funding is specifically for this.
Well, the PEG funding is.
The PEG
Yeah, the
If we
funding,
want, if we want
So
40%
now
of
here's-
that 5%.
Well, now here's the question. How much of the PEG fee are you gonna ask for?
All of it.
Well, two-thirds.
Well, just for,
What's your
Well,
justification?
1/3. Oh, yeah, because we have to go for 1/3, because education's
Well, I
gonna
mean,
get a
well,
third.
We have
So-
to do what you said before.
As a starting point,
Well,
logically, rationally, you could say, well, P should get a third.
Yeah,
Okay. But I'm gonna say, school districts and the government have other sources of funds. The Access Corporation doesn't have other sources of funds. The Access Corporation doesn't have city municipal buildings and office fronts. So, you know, part of the discussion is, yes, while 1/3 of the PEG funds may be, in fact, what you were thinking, we're gonna ask for half, because, number one, you're not giving anything to this E. You know, I don't think the city gives anything to
they
E.
don't.
I know that Kitty Merrill, who I knew from 1985 when I moved up here and signed on 63, is no longer at Oxnard College, and they're looking at shutting down the program because there's no funding.
Todd, the city has said that there was never any money. They said they have no money for any television whatsoever.
well, but that-
So,
that's-
you've got a pretty good start on the audit,
Right, exactly.
okay? The money's there. Is the political will there? And how do you create the political will? You create the political will by making it painful for them not to change. And if you create a large enough coalition, then you get their attention, and it's easier, when we went through our franchise now, it's easier to give you a certain bit of funding that it's designated for. I mean, the franchise fees still come from the cable system, they're linked. They won't say that, it's like the TOT tax is linked to the Visitors and Convention Bureau. They don't get it all, but certainly the TOT tax rises when the VCB does well. And if the VCB does poorly, the TOT will tend to fall. And so, no, that's all general fund money, but there is a linkage there. So where do you start with the conversation about how much of this should we have?
When we look at the education component, apparently there've been somebody from the
I
education.
forget about it.
Wait, but
You're not gonna change it.
we do, you do, and the Santa Barbara TV and
Right.
access providers do
Right.
education.
Right.
You train people how to use your studios
Right.
and your equipment and all of that. And some of the programming is an educational value, a lot of
Well,
it is.
But think about it in terms of voice. It's not about whether it's educational content, it's who's speaking. The government channel is the government's voice.
Right.
The education channel is the educational institution's voice. public access channel is the public's voice. A lot of my producers produce educational content. They would love for it to go on Channel 15, but it is not the government's voice.
So I hear you saying it shouldn't be one, it should be more like 2/3.
Or
because these other
a
entities-
half,
or a
because
half.
they have other alternatives, they have more
Right.
resources to begin with
Right.
to draw on. Now, you may not get it, but you can make the argument.
Right.
The other side of it is you've got to create linkage between creating a value, why people would want to go to the cable system rather than, so that's why the franchise fees matter. That there's a linkage between quality local content, pertinent local content, and the franchise fees. The more people stay with cable to watch what's on Channel 25, okay, the more franchise fees go up. And so you make that argument, and you craft it, and you find who needs who. There's gonna be maybe 1 out of the 5 that hears that. There's gonna be 1 out of the 5 that hears another one. And you create a well-crafted argument across the face of this, so that at the end of the day, they can say no to you. But if you've got 600 people in the room and letters from everybody else, and they turn around and say no, there may be pain involved in that. And that's just political reality.
It'd be hard for them to say no.
Well-
With 600 people
It-
out there.
And yet I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
Look at, Wisconsin, look at Ohio,
This is Oxnard.
And so, what is it that you have here that you can bring and add to the pot that creates the story that grabs their attention and sells this to them?
Diversity.
That's part of it, sure. So is this diverse enough? Is it big enough?
That's my hope, is that we're going to become, incorporate and invite all the diversity we can find.
Right.
And we have working class. That's so big here.
So you've got, I think, some of the things that will make you more successful is being broader based, and then developing your message, which involves your policy, what we're gonna provide, how we're gonna provide it. And you don't necessarily have to even finish the policies as much as tell the story about what you're here to do. To train, to provide facilities, to provide a forum, Then you can get even more esoteric and you talk about electronic green space. And, the access channels are similar to parks. They're set aside for public use in the midst of all this corporate media. None of our citizens can go down to Los Angeles and participate. We can't buy time on KNBC or KCBS, but we created here for them. We've carved out this space for them. And so there's a lot of this, and as you go online, there's tons of it out there. But you've got to think about, some of it will resonate locally, and some of it may not. Some of that resonates much more in Berkeley, probably, than it will in Oxnard. But some of the diversity issues will resonate far more here than they will even in Ventura.
Oh.
So what resonates locally? And what are your electeds invested in, and what are they concerned about?
This is really remarkable. I'm so grateful to you for
Well,
being here.
That's not a problem.
This is tremendous
Glad to do it.
insight and information.
All right. And you've got my contact info. I would ask if you could funnel it all through like one person.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Um,
We'll pick on Robert, he's not here to vote.
Okay. Just because it can get to be, I've got about 11,000 emails in my inbox, and I keep trying to get it under 5, and it just never happens. Someday I'll just flush it all out and start over. Oh, the server went down, darn it. But I'm happy to help when I can. I think that probably the single biggest thing is to remove the adversarial relationship and to create a partnership with the city for the Access Corporation. Then you can open the door to the access producer. And that is key. They can't see you as a threat. They see you as providing value, they see you as outreach to, you know, I mean, we're going into our 5th season of local elections, and last year was our 2nd season of county, state, and federal election coverage. You know, who comes to Ventura County from LA to cover our local elections? Nobody does. You know, so we're in off-year elections. I think we start our video voter program next week or the week after. We invite every candidate that's participating on the ballot to come in. They make a candidate statement. They go through a set of interview questions. They're given the questions, and you know, but they come in and we record it, and then we sit there and we air them through election day.
That's what the Star does too.
But it's not on,
They're
not on,
aired, but,
yeah.
but.
They do interviews,
Yeah, they do.
and the quality of those has come down over the years,
Yeah.
I've noticed. I mean, so you've got a lot of things that happen here in town that you can focus on.
Yeah.
Just as an example, we had numerous candidate forums, and, you know, attendance was, I would say that attendance was sparse.
Yeah.
But now if we're able to televise that,
Well, let's just get to the point, yeah, where we'll cover 9 or 10 forums in this election cycle. We're gonna try to cover a couple of them live. But again, that's technology and that's done there. What you tell them is, we're here to cover the local elections. The ability to do so
yeah.
Yeah.
It might not be televised until after the election, but.
is dependent upon funding. I mean,
Only if
It's
you give
dependent on-
us the
yeah.
funds.
at that point, it becomes the funding.
Boy, do we ever need some money to broadcast this.
In your studio technology, what is the quality of the equipment? Is it high definition now, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's one of the things that,
You can't buy non-high def
okay.
equipment anymore.
That's one of the things that.
That doesn't mean you're gonna get a high def channel.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. But you can produce,
We acquire and produce everything in high def,
yeah.
and then we put it in a server as high def, and then it comes out as standard def and goes on the channel.
Okay.
Oh, because you don't have. high-
Cable system is not required at this point to
So
provide.
then, but we want to still be able to produce high def, because.
Yeah, it's virtually
be able
impossible
to-
to
prepare for the
buy
future,
standard
you know,
def.
so.
Right. If you were starting, again, that's down the road a piece, but if you were starting now, everything would be HD.
So we really have to focus on making the city council an offer that they cannot refuse.
You're building a coalition and you're telling a story about why this initiative matters.
Well, it gives them information too about what's happening in the community.
You know, it's not about technology, it's not about the content, it's about the impact of the access.
So our next meeting, we need some new faces here.
I would say, well, that's up to you. I would say if it was me, yeah, I'd be
Yes,
looking
oh,
for,
absolutely.
and maybe you start breaking it down, you know, you have one meeting with faith-based, you have one meeting with, service clubs, you know, and then out of that group, maybe they pick, well, you know, so-and-so's involved in media, so they come, and then they can go back and report back to their groups, you know, and it's like any other grassroots organizing. So if you've got folks in town that have, you know, get out the vote people, would be, you know, those tactics and those strategies are what you're looking for at this point.
You know, that coalition that you're defining has been needed so badly in Oxnard since I came here. And nobody has ever been able to accomplish it. Oh, I don't even know if anybody ever tried.
So we did with the LNG.
The LNG, yeah. Well, it wasn't really faith-based and service provider. I mean, it really wasn't that broad. It was mostly green people.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. But all of these, you know, like you say, the nonprofits, and I've always wished we had it.
Well, they have to see the value in having an access channel. Otherwise, you're not gonna, you're not.
Well, but it's more than the channel, it's the access organization,
Mhm.
it's the training you provide, it's the access to the equipment to provide, it's the partnership with at-risk kids or seniors, it's the partnership with veterans groups and with faith-based. It's more than just the channel. The channel's just a way to publish the content. You know, if you had a radio station, you could put it out over the radio station as well. So, and at some point, quite honestly, in 20 years, the funding, franchise fees may dry up and go away. Those channels may go away.
Yeah.
But the function of the Access Center, to do education, to do training, to build partnerships, to develop media, and to push it out through other means and other channels, will still be there. YouTube, Vimeo, radio, whatever it is. So don't focus just on the channel. The channel happens to be today, and I think that's the thing that a lot of access centers are shutting down because they've only focused on the cable channel piece of it. You've got to float up 10,000 feet and say, how are we relevant to the community with regard to training and other things? It'd be kind of like, you know, we're the community buggy whip manufacturer, you know, and here comes the car and we're left holding the buggy whip. You're left holding the cable channel when everything goes over the top or everything goes Hulu. What are you gonna do? Well, you're gonna shift your delivery mechanism.
Some new
It's-
media comes along.
Right.
So we have to put,
You know, this is a self-serving question now. What does membership fee cost to become a member of CAPS?
$25.
And then I could attend your Wednesday night training even though I'm a total greenhorn,
Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Are you live, work, or go to school in Ventura?
No,
You have to be,
That's, the criteria are you have to live, work, or go to school in Ventura.
so if I went to Ventura College, I could then.
Yes.
I have gone to Ventura College.
that's his role.
What?
Go enroll.
I know, it's easy, especially with, you know, distance learning, with the drive over there.
Did you have a question, sir?
I think he was.
Oh, me, no, go ahead. I actually forgot what I was gonna say.
What would you consider to be a lot of us are desperate, you know, to get this going, so what
Take a
would,
deep breath and find 5 people that you think would support what you're doing and write a letter.
but what would be a reasonable timeline to get this?
I don't know. That's gonna depend on your electors as
But
much
we
as
can
anything.
start on YouTube, like you said,
Sure. Sure.
for the voice to be heard.
And you have the first.
But that's more about content than it is about the access
Oh, yeah.
organization.
and I'm looking for the coalition piece. I mean, I really, I don't want to volunteer myself here, but I do community ministry. That's my bailiwick, and so I'm really connected with a lot of the communities
Sure.
that exist here in Ventura County.
Sure.
And so I am visualizing how to bring them into this right away. I
So-
didn't realize how quickly they could be involved.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
It's
that's
your next
great.
meeting.
Yeah.
For
And we tell
instance,
them that, well, 40% of their programming is religious.
Right.
I can just imagine their ears going,
Well,
really?
we're not giving 40% to the religious community. We
Why
have
not?
a lot of different diversity of communities.
why not though? So what are you gonna do if the first 80 shows out of 100 are religious? You're not gonna turn them away?
Oh, no, but I want to
But you-
really be careful that we're on the social justice issues,
Sure.
that's all.
But-
You know, it's not a proselytizing
But-
opportunity.
Sure it is. It's
Well-
also that.
Not.
It's also that.
Oh,
It's also, and anything you say, it's also that. And that's the key. The
Yeah,
key is more speech,
that's true, that's
not
true.
less speech.
But some of us on the liberal side of liberal religion have been outvoiced quite considerably for too long.
Well.
So I have some sensitivities about that.
So
I'm
again,
Unitarian, what can I say?
you're creating an equitable platform
Yeah,
for everybody.
fully accessible.
And, you know, if you read some of these manuals, I mean, they specify, you know, how much a content provider can, you know, put on the.
Submit.
Submit, right, so, you know, there are.
You know, and,
Some
well,
ways-
there are
and you
ways
have
to
certain
control.
things that kick in as you fill up a channel, where So for instance, and this gets way deep into policy, but, you know, we have X number of hours of programming submitted, then you get X number of replays. So if the channel gets full on first-time submissions, like in BronxNet or in Manhattan Neighborhood Network, you know, you get one play, maybe per quarter or per month, and then you go away and you wait for your next play to come along. Now, most of us don't have that problem. You know, so we get a submittal and we probably, a new submission will run 3 or 4 times in a week, and then if it's resubmitted, it'll run once or twice. You know, and then you have policy that says, you know, you're gonna commit, if you're gonna get a time slot, you're gonna commit to, you know, over a 13-week quarter to at least 7 new pieces of content. You know, and if the channel gets X full, you know, you can only, and content means new and unique content, not the same thing with a different label slapped on it. We've never had anybody do that.
And see, I think, you know, what, I mean.
But that's the operating policies. What you're looking for is the governance policies first.
And we really have to be salesmen in this regard, that if I go up and say to the city council, well, you know, boy, I want this channel so I can put on, you know, the angry white guy show, they're not gonna pay much attention to me. But if, you know, if we get a coalition of the churches to say, well, you know, we want this to.
The churches and the League of Women Voters and the NAACP and, you know, one of the things I was gonna say, when Fresno launched and in Minneapolis, they both have a large Hmong population. Do you have, you know, we did some, I can't remember which, it was one of the, Mixteco, breastfeeding thing. What do you have in your community that targets those different ethnicities than usually come to the table? That'll get their attention in a heartbeat. You know, if you've got Hmong or Thai or, you know, Mixteco, you know, so who are your top 2 Mixteco representatives? And can they produce content, do a quick 3-minute blurb, and show it at the city council and say, this is why we're here. We're here to communicate to our constituency.
Yeah.
That's where you start leveraging, and it becomes harder. The more of those you have, the harder it is to say no at the end of the day. Because people are sitting there going, well, wait a minute. They want to create this thing that adds value to the community, that everybody can come and take use of, that no one else is doing right now. You know, why shouldn't we be doing something like this? You know, and you make it hard for them to say no, but you do it by gaining their confidence in your ability to deliver. Because right now, they have a very low confidence in anybody's ability to deliver. So some of that is broadening the coalition, and then some of it's refining the message. That's why I say, I think, you know, the other thing would be finding like a civil rights attorney or a social justice attorney to kind of help you craft a message, or an activist, somebody that's done campaigning of some kind.
So you need a real broad-based support, number 1, stakeholders.
Right.
And number 2, a very well-done presentation
Right.
for the city council.
Right.
Those 2
Right.
elements.
I think those are the 2, because that's,
There's like 3-minute sample program.
you know, that may come later. I think what you do is, what you're doing now is creating credibility. You're creating breadth and viability, and then
Right.
honing the message to create credibility.
But you said something about a 3-minute message, I'm trying to connect words.
Well, though, for instance, as you get to your 2nd or your 3rd meeting, having Mixteco representation and showing a 30-second clip from a Mixteco PSA about a health issue, or how to register to vote, or, you know, outreach to that as an underrepresented community will ring a bell with somebody on the council.
So I could do ex-offenders,
Will it ring a bell with one of the,
parents or what, I'll tell you.
But see, that's the
We
thing,
gotta reach
is
the city
you're,
council
you're looking
Oh, I
for
see.
3 out of 5.
I know.
It doesn't have to be
Wrong thing.
a video program, it doesn't, it could be a PowerPoint.
It could be, sure.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's up to, as you begin to build, you're beginning a campaign.
I think the more visual stuff you have, I think it enhances the presentation.
Well, and the other thing that it demonstrates is competency.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're saying you want to take over what is essentially video, today is a video training and production and post-production enterprise.
yeah.
You should be able to show them something of good quality.
You can get farm workers and farmers.
Yeah. I mean, we've had John Christ from the Farm Bureau
Oh, yeah.
in, we've had, there's all